Hello everyone. In this video we will convert our Component.js file to Typescript. But before, let me quickly fix the typo from the previous video and make this web app and save. And now we can get started. Let's first rename our Component.js to .ts and open it. And as usual, let's start with our import. So I will copy everything from here without the commas, and here let's first paste everything and select everything and say import something from these, and let's also copy what we are importing as well and paste here. And next, let's also create and export our class. We say export default class, and let's name it component, which extends the UI component. And then let's see what we have. First we have our metadata. Let's copy this. And since this metadata needs to be accessed from the UI5 framework as some static information about our component, we have to mark it as both public and static. So we say public static metadata equals this object. And next we should have our init method. Here, let's copy this one. To here. And let's get rid of the function keyword first. And we can set the return type as void. And the first problem we have is calling the base component's init function. But since we are using classes, we can do this simply by saying super, which points to the super class UI component, and then we can call the init method on that. Now we have that fixed. We have our router initialization, device model, and our error handling, which we have some issues as well. First, if we check here, we can see that this usage is deprecated to access the message manager, and instead we should import it. So let's go all the way up, maybe here before the model, and don't worry about this issue, we will fix that at the end of the video. So first let's import messaging from SAP UI core messaging, and let's copy that. Now instead of getting the message model like this, we can say let's first get rid of this part, and we can say messaging.getMessageModel, and we had this var keyword here. Let's make this a const, and let's switch this with a semicolon. And then we have the binding. Let's also put a const in here. And now we have our message model list binding. And the next issue is simply this method not being existent. So let's also move that. Let's take it here. Copy. Paste here. Again, remove the function keyword. And now we have a problem with oEvent having the type any implicitly. And if you remember our TS config, we set the strict mode to true, and that's why we are getting this error. But I will take care of the event handling in detail in the next video. So for now, I will just set it to any explicitly like this to get rid of the error. And next error is this B error not being existing on our component. So let's create that. And we are also using this from our controller. So it also has to be public like our metadata, but it cannot be static. So we say public B error, and let's initialize it as false. And since we initialize it with a boolean, we don't have to specify any type because TypeScript can infer it from this boolean value. and we can see it already has the type boolean. And let's go ahead and see what else we have. Let's first make this var a const. We really shouldn't use var. And since we need to reassign a messages and this variable here, these cannot be consts. So let's finish this here and make these to let, so we can reassign those. And now we have another issue here about all context, again having the type any implicitly. But first let's convert this to an arrow function, which is much leaner. And since we are immediately returning this, we don't need the return keyword and also these curly braces. Well, let's also remove those. And now setting the type of this all context. There are two ways we can do that. First, we can specify the type right here. So we can say this is of type context. And if you are using VS Code, it will automatically suggest you this context from SAP UI model context, which is good enough for us. And if you select that, it will add the import dynamically. And now we can get rid of this error. But what we can also do is, the reason this all context has type any, because Typescript doesn't know that this o_event.getSource is of type list binding. So Typescript doesn't know the type of this, so it doesn't know what this thing returns, right? What we can also do instead of this is to tell Typescript that this part here is a list binding. But how do we even know if this should be a list binding? So this is an event handler on our message model binding, right? And it's coming from our message model. And we imported that from SAP UI core messaging. So let's go to our good old API reference and search for core.messaging. And here it is. And we are using the get message model to get the message model. And let's navigate to there. And we are using the bind list method on it. So if we check that, we can see that it's returning something of type SAP UI model list binding. So what we can do is, let's copy this and import it in our app. Here, let's say import list binding from, this should be lowercase of course, from here, and let's switch these with slashes. And let's copy this, and here we can say our event source right here is a list binding, and we can do that by using typecasting. But first we need to put these in parentheses, and then here we can say or event get source as list binding. And now we don't have this error, but I will leave it here as an alternative solution. Oops, where were we? Here, let's duplicate this. And now we don't need this type because we already know that this a context is a list binding, and what will be returned is a context which has this method. And our next error, again, first let's remove this part and use messaging we imported. And I see we already have that here, so let's also switch this. And now it says a messages, and it's not assignable to parameter of type message, so it's expecting either a message or an array of messages. And how we can fix this is, here we define our a messages. We can say that this is of type array, and it's an array of messages. So if we type message here, we should get again some suggestions. and it should come from this SAP UI core message. So let's select that, and like that we have our type for messages, and let's initialize it as an empty array. And now we have another issue, and if we check, it says object is not assignable to type message, which also makes sense because our context.getObject just returns an object, but we already know that this object will have the type of message, so we can once again use typecasting and say get object as message. And now that's gone. And now the next error we have is this. This used to work before, but this message property is probably not public on the message type, and we don't have access to this, but we do have access to a method named, let's see, getMessage. So we use this one instead. And then we have an error about this keyword, but we don't really have to do anything about it if we simply convert this function to an array function. And since it's an array function, we don't need bind this. Let's also get rid of that. Now it knows this is referring to our component and the error exists on it, so the error is gone. And finally, let's get rid of all the old code. Save. And now we have only one error left. Let me also comment this part out for the alternate solution. And this error here, if we check what this is about, let's see, it says cannot find the declaration file for module models, so it has of type any, and we can fix that by simply converting our models.js file to Typescript as well. So let's find that file here and rename to models.ts, and let's open it. And it's a very lean one. Let's again copy our imports like so, paste, and import something from these, and let's copy these parts. And now we again say export default, but now we are not exporting a class, but we are simply returning a JavaScript object. So we can simply say export default object, and our object has this method, so let's copy that, remove the function keyword, and let's replace this var with const, and we simply return the model. Let's remove everything from here. And we can also set a return type here. It's already being inferred because our model is a JSON model, and Typescript already knows that this method returns a JSON model, but we can also explicitly say that it will return a JSON model. Now if we save, go back, error is still here. Let's try to restart our Typescript server. And now the error is gone. Our app should be still running, so let's check if it's still all good. There is an error. Let's see. Let's check our console. Reading initialize Component.js 28. It should be about the router here. Actually, it's not about the router, it's some very important step that I missed, which is the namespace of our component. So we have to specify that here at the top of our class. So let's create a comment here, and we use the annotation at namespace. And then the namespace of our app, let's copy it from manifest.json, which is our app ID. And let's paste it, go back to our app, try again, and now everything is back to normal. That would be all for this video, and see you in the next one.